to Kids Doc Talk with Dr. Jenny. Dr. Jenny is a board-certified pediatrician and is the director of telemedicine at Pediatric Associates.
Hi, Cherie. Welcome. I'm excited to have you. This is such an important topic. So I want to dive right in. But before we get into the nitty-gritty questions, tell us a little bit about the Kids Safe Foundation and kind of what your mission is, what you guys do.
Sure. Thank you so much for asking. So the Kids Safe Foundation was born officially in 2009 by myself and a co-founder, Sally Berensweig. And I'm a social worker by trade and an educator first, elementary school and middle school. And what happened was I had a lot of situations in the middle school and elementary schools that I was working in with situations of child sexual abuse. And I had a particular situation that really turned me on my head of a child who didn't come forward until she was realizing that her stepfather was interested in her little sister. And this was an eye-opener for me because it made me realize that she didn't feel comfortable or confident or knew how to come forward to save herself, but she did come forward to save her little sister. And that was the moment where I said, all children need to know they have the right to be safe. They all need some form of education to know what their healthy boundaries are and to know how to access help. And that's where it was born of. And then Sally and I joined forces and we created the Kids Safe Foundation, which is a primary prevention education program. We literally go out and we educate the masses because this can happen to anyone. And we do it through in-person education, in the school education, adult education, online education. And our mission is to meet with as many people as possible. We've taught over 50,000 children across the years and probably the same amount of adults across the years. And we're only growing and getting stronger. And we want parents like your audience today to know that they can use our free resources to help keep their own children safe.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you guys are doing some really great work. I have a feeling that the initial instinctive response to somebody listening to this is, well, this is really important and that's really nice, right? And we need to do this, but it's not going to happen to my child, right? This is something that happens to other people's kids. So yes, we should talk about it, but not in context of my own kids. So how common is this really? Because I have a feeling that I think that the numbers may surprise us. How common is sexual abuse in children?
Yeah. So the reality is it's much more common than your average person realizes. If you really pay attention, you'll notice that it's in the news on a daily basis. But most of the cases that we're talking about never make the news because they're in families, in neighborhoods, in local churches, and nobody's talking about it. It's only that big, the big news that make the news. The reality is 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys will be a victim of child sexual abuse by the age of 18. And then I'm going to put a caveat on that because most children never report. So those are not based on actual numbers. So the numbers are really much higher. So what I like to do is compare. If those numbers, 1 in 4 and 1 in 13 were about, say, childhood cancer, God forbid, but childhood cancer, we would be marching on Washington to demanding money for research, money for prevention, etc. Child sexual abuse is like a silent epidemic. And even the CDC has come out and declared it how do they word it? A public health crisis. So just like smoking, not wearing seatbelts, these are public health crises. Child sexual abuse is a public health crisis that needs to be addressed, and it's best addressed through primary prevention.
So those numbers are very sobering, and I think putting it as comparing it to a disease like cancer, it makes me want to put on my doctor hat and say, gosh, if cancer was so common, my question would always be okay, what am I looking for? How does it present? How do I have that red flag go up as both a parent and a pediatrician to suspect that something might be wrong. So
Yeah.
how is it typically identified, or who are like common reporters to sort of bring this to the surface?
Yeah. So these are great questions, and I wish the answer was more black and white and simple, but it's not. You know, a child who is being sexually abused will not necessarily show signs or symptoms, and that's the tricky part. There's also often like a misnomer, like a child is being physically abused, they might actually have an injury that someone could see. But with sexual abuse, you often cannot see, even if they're being physically sexually abused, even raped, there might not necessarily be telltale signs, especially if it's not reported immediately. And most of the time, it is not reported immediately. So the reality is we're looking for things like changes in behavior, different fears arising, changes in mood or transitioning or of people or of interests, depression, anxiety. Now, a lot of different things can cause all of those issues that those characteristics that I just mentioned. So it's a matter of really talking to children. You know, and it could be about bullying, it could be about divorce in the family, it could be about a death in the family. There's so many reasons why children might have a lot of those issues. But it really goes back a bunch of cases of what have I taught my children about their personal safety so I can have comfortable conversations with them if I have any concerns. So when we're teaching professionals like pediatricians about sexual abuse prevention, we literally have lists that they need to read. Emotional changes, behavioral changes, potentially physical changes. But one of the changes that we do often see is what we call psychosomatic complaints. And what that means, and I know you know what that means, but I'll explain it to the audience and you can chime in, please, is that a child will start complaining about stomach aches and headaches and other physical symptoms that are real, and understand that that child is genuinely experiencing those physical symptoms, and you're schlepping that child back and forth to the doctor and they can't pinpoint what's going on. And that's when you have to look into what is bothering that child, what's happening for that child, and then try to figure it out from there. Has there been changes in childcare? You know, do they have a new friend that they spend a lot of time with? And it's a little bit of sleuthing and asking some of the right questions. But the more we've done preventative work in the beginning, from age 0 on up, about personal safety, just like we would teach swim safety, the better those conversations are part of your family. And that's what we're trying to do, make it a culture of safety in your family.
So I think we're going to end up talking a lot about prevention, because that really seems to be like the key to sort of, right, understanding a little more about this and to increase the likelihood that this will be reported. But in general, what have you seen in terms of the reporting? Like, who is most common to report it? Does it come from a doctor? Does it come from a teacher? Does it come from like a school social worker? Or is it a parent? Who is like on the forefront of reporting?
So there's mixed reviews in the research about who that is. But we do know that, of course, educators actually spend the most time with children and are the ears and the eyes. I say it's like looking at your classroom of children through your third eye and your third ear, and being just aware and in tune with changes in a child. Oh, they started out the school year, happy-go-lucky and, and focused, et cetera. And now you're seeing a change in that child's behavior. That's just a red flag that something's going on for them. And it needs some further investigation, maybe a referral to the school social worker, for example. It's really being in tune. It's listening to comments that kids make. And so teachers who spend a lot of time with children, especially in the elementary years, have more of an opportunity to be at the front line, like the first line of defense in a child's safety. I would like pediatricians to be even more so, because I feel that if, as a parent, and I think parents will agree with me, that when they have an issue with their child, no matter what that issue is, the first place they call and go to is the pediatrician.
As
And
they,
that's
as
what
they
we
should,
want.
right? As they should,
As
and that,
they
that's what we want as pediatricians, is to be like that first line of defense. Of like, well, something is wrong, but I don't know what it is. Like,
Exactly.
right? It's our job.
And I feel so strongly that we as Kids Safe and other people who do what I do need to partner even more with pediatricians to send that message that even pediatricians feel comfortable to talk about these topics, but they don't until they're trained and comfortable to talk about these topics. Fair enough.
For sure.
You know, that wasn't part of the curriculum that you went through, you know, necessarily when you were studying to be a doctor. But I do feel that with all the mental health concerns that we have and the pandemic, all of this is heightened. And we do know that sexual abuse is even more rampant because many children were at home in isolation with their abusers. So with that said, a lot of this is, once again, it's not just educating the parents, it's educating the professionals who work with children and educating the children themselves.
So since you mentioned like a recent sort of uptake, and certainly we saw this happen in the context of all sorts of abuse for exactly the reason that you mentioned, where children were in the home with their abusers and parents were under, right, an increased amount of stress, and sometimes that resulted unfortunately in abuse happening and pediatricians having less access to the kids if we weren't, right, seeing them for their usual appointments. And so it was sort of like the perfect storm. So and we're hopefully, coming out of that uptick a little bit, and hopefully numbers should start to normalize to where they were before, or ideally not having any of this happen. But what are some long-lasting effects that I think we're probably seeing now? Because maybe that will clue us in that something had happened. What are some either psychological and even physical effects that we see in kids who've been abused?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and there's been a lot of studies done on long-term trauma, and we call it in the professional world and in the regular world ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. And it's important that parents know about this because we all have experienced ACEs. We all have experienced trauma of some sort in our childhood. Everyone has their story. And the more we understand how our own childhood traumas are even impacting our children, because we know that now there's a trickle-down effect, the better we can keep our children safe and break some of those cycles. So I'm going to start by saying that first. And I do suggest parents Google the word ACEs, A-C-E small s, so capital A, capital C, capital E, small s, and you'll find information about that, and it's fascinating. But the point is that children who have experienced childhood trauma, like child sexual abuse, do go on to have increased problems in their older years. So if they were abused as young children, those problems are just going to start at a younger age. And it runs the gamut from intellectual issues. So it impacts their brain development. And so their learning is impacted. It impacts their social and emotional skills, because children often who have been abused, any type of abuse, understandably become distrustful. They're distrustful of people, and they have a harder time creating healthy relationships, or even understanding what a healthy relationship should look like, because the relationships they've been in have been abusive. And it can impact them for certain physically. We know that long-term abuse of any sort can impact the health and well-being of long-term of an adult, with issues of higher increase of diabetes and heart issues and COPD and Alzheimer's, but also an increase in potential addiction, depression, anxiety, suicide rates are higher for kids who have experienced trauma. So it really runs the gamut. There is also a cost to this. So if we could prevent these traumas from happening in childhood, the cost of one person, I think it's like $200,000 per person who's been abused for a lifetime, that they need to, and we need to as a society invest in that child. And the reality is there are over, oh my goodness, 40 million adult survivors in the United States today. They're adults now that have survived child sexual abuse. So all of them have some sort of long-term ramifications from their abuse. Some more, some less. We're all different levels of resiliency, etc. We can have a long-term impact on those kids that are potentially going to experience sexual abuse, or we're going to stop it in its tracks by educating them at a younger age. And I know I always come back to that because I feel so strongly that we can change those statistics.
So let's talk about education, because that really sounds like that's at the core of this crisis, right? So what are some ways to educate? Let's talk children, because I know like education, right? We can do parents, we can do schools, we can do doctors, but let's start with like, what can we do as parents? How can we educate children regarding personal safety or unsafe situations that may unfortunately lead to abuse?
Yeah. So start with some regular basics that as a doctor, you will say, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I'm sorry, I don't know if you have children or not.
I do. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if you talk about that, but I will bring this up. The first thing to do is so basic. Teach your children the proper names for their body parts. So just as you're raising your kids, they're 2 years old, they're 3 years old, they're in the bathtub, and you're minding them, you're sitting on the bathtub side, you're sitting on the potty, chatting with them, they're playing with their toys, and you say, hey, where's your nose? And they point to their nose, and you're all giddy because they know where their nose is and it's all exciting. Include all of their body parts. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on a live podcast.
Yeah, listen, anatomic body parts, that's okay, right? That's the point. Nothing controversial about names for anatomic body parts.
No, it's, what we say is an elbow is an elbow, and a penis is a penis, and a vagina is not a vulva. And we, my age group, as adults, I'm older than you, we grew up learning that we had a vagina, and nobody ever mentioned that I had a vulva or any other body parts. So it's important that we actually teach them the proper names for their body parts, and that we as adults become more comfortable. And so really, before you teach your child the proper names for the body parts, you have to do your own homework. So depending on your upbringing, your cultural upbringing, your ethnic upbringing, your religious upbringing, you're going to bring that baggage along with you. And you might not be even comfortable saying the word penis out loud, because in the old days, maybe you got your mouth washed out with soap if you said the word penis. And you could have even been saying, I have a rash on my buttock, on my breast, on my vagina, on my vulva, So number one, getting comfortable. And so the advice I give to parents, and it might sound silly, but it really does help, is to get in front of a mirror and literally say the word 100 times and just go penis, 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 vagina, 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 blah, 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 until it doesn't sound like anything and you don't get that visceral reaction of giddiness or silliness or laughing, and you gain more comfort. And then also talk with your partner, if you have a partner, and say, we need to do this. I feel awkward about this. Maybe they do too. How can we get more comfortable? Because we send messages with just this one skill. We send messages. So I'll give you an example. My daughter, when she was probably about 3, she was in the bathtub. She looked down at herself naked, sitting in the bathtub, and she saw that her private area looked like a triangle. Brilliant child. And she said, look, mommy, triangle, and I'm like, wow, that's great. And that was it, and that's part of like just normalizing these things, right? And then if she said something to her father at the time, he would go like, oh, no, we don't talk about that. You can talk to your mommy about that. Well, that sends a message that something's weird or uncomfortable or inappropriate or shameful about talking about those body parts. And we want daddies and mommies to have equal input into the health and well-being of both boys and girls.
Cherie, so I want to take this one step further, because I want to talk about the importance of anatomic body parts, right? Why is it important? Because I think people may not realize the significance of what happens when a child doesn't really, has like these generic names like, right, privates, wee, whatever they use at home, and what the implications of that might be.
Yeah. So there's two sides to that. One is that when we use nicknames and silly names for body parts, which almost every single family I know has names for, we're sending a message that there's something wrong with that body part and we can't actually address it for what it is, or they're embarrassed about it or shameful. But then on the other hand, we put them in danger, because if they go to report and they go to tell someone is trying to touch my body part, or someone did touch my body part, and they use the word, for example, cookie, pocketbook, wee wee, bong bong, I mean, I've heard them all, the person receiving that message might not get the information. And I'm going to give you a story. Everybody knows the story. It is a true story. A kindergartner goes up to their teacher and says, my daddy wants to share my cookie. And the teacher says, well, that's great. You should share your cookie with your daddy. All right, done. Child comes back a week later and says, my daddy wants to eat my cookie. And thank goodness at this point, the teacher did not understand, but thought, this is really strange. I've never had a child say this to me. Why would she be saying? So she shared this information with a coworker, and the coworker said, oh my goodness, her cookie is her private parts. It's slang, blah, blah, blah. And a report was made, and thank goodness. Now, note that that child was talking in a certain tense. She was saying, my daddy wants to share my cookie. My daddy wants to eat my cookie. The reality was it was already happening. But that's another thing about language with children, that they often don't know past, present, future. They can't tell you what happened. Everything was yesterday. Right. It wasn't 10 days ago or 2 months ago or 2 years ago. So it's really, really important that we listen to what they say, and we listen with our third ear and watch with our third eye. And we don't miss the hints that they give us, because they don't often have language for this. Another reason why we want to teach them skills so that they have a language of safety. So teaching them the proper names for their body parts, and then giving them praise when they use it in an appropriate way is hugely important. If they go for testimony at they're in court and there's testimony, and that child used a nickname for that, it will get thrown out. That person will stay free and continue walking this earth, abusing other children.
So that's what I was getting at, and that I think is really critical for parents to understand, that you obviously never want to be in this situation, but if you are and you have a child and this is being brought to court, right? A cookie doesn't work in a deposition. Yeah. It doesn't work in court.
The other thing that's amazing is simply by teaching your child the proper names for their private parts, it makes them a harder target, because offenders want a child who knows nothing about their private parts.
Talk, right? He's not going to
talk. So if this is a kid who knows a penis is a penis, or a vagina is a vagina, and a vulva is a vulva, they're going to say, ooh, that someone is educating that child. I don't want to mess with that kid. I'll move on.
Okay, so I know the language is important. Anything else that like parents can kind of concretely take away in terms of education regarding personal safety?
Sure. There's so many things, but I'm going to start with this. Our kids, today's world, are contending with so many issues in their lives. We as parents need to be the most approachable and accessible as possible to be a support for them. But we also often assume, oh, my kid knows I'm available. They'll come to me if they need help, etc. And we can't just assume that anymore. We need to be teaching them from a very young age that they can talk to us about anything, that they will not be in trouble if they report something important, like they saw something on the they should not have seen, or they even did something or said something that was not right. Because otherwise they're not going to talk to us. It doesn't mean they don't get consequences for actions, but it means that we need to not jump to punishment, but jump to listening, okay? So what I suggest is that every parent from a very young age create a ritual in their household where every day for 10 minutes, each of your children, even if you have 5 or more, gets 10 minutes of your time alone. And that could be during a car drive. That could be during when you're cooking dinner and they're sitting at the table talking to you. That could be at tuck-in time, at bed, that could be bath time. Find 10 minutes where your child has one-on-one with you, and make it time where it's screen-free.
Protective time.
Yep. And that is so valuable because that's a tradition. And, it's a family tradition, and the kids will understand over the course of time. This is where I absolutely have my grown-ups' full attention. And you train them to use that time, in any way they want. And that's where you can have important conversations. Like you could say, hey, Janie, I saw that when you came back from your play date today, you seemed a little sad. And then that's it. You don't say a word. You button up. And then you leave the door open for them to talk to you. And that's how we really start understanding what are their lives away from us in a healthy way. I don't want to create helicopter parents. That is exactly the opposite, actually, of what I'm trying to do. We want to empower our kids with skills, empower them to be resilient and problem solve, and then know when to come to their adult for help.
I love that. So I think we probably have so much more to talk about. I think we probably need to do part 2 of this, because I want to address, some more situations and like some more skills that we can empower kids with. But it's sort of for this part 1, anything that you want to add, any like major takeaways that you want parents to have at this point of what we've discussed?
That when you're thinking about teaching your children personal safety, I want you to think about it with a mindset of, I'm not going to teach this from a place of fear. I'm not doing this because I'm scared. I'm doing this because just like I teach my kid how to swim so they won't drown and they'll enjoy water sports and water fun, I'm going to teach them personal safety to lessen the chance that they'll get harmed and that they'll enjoy and feel good and confident in life. And sometimes before you start teaching, you need to do some homework. And that might be listening to podcasts like this one. That might be going onto the KidSafe website and reading some of our little blogs and listening to some of our tips and getting comfortable with the language that we use. And then talking to your friends and family. Make this something that's not just happening in your house. Make it a norm. And once we make it a norm, then you're really making a difference in our society, which will be safer for all of our children.
That's fantastic. I think this is a good place for us to like finish this part of the conversation, but I have so many more questions. So I think a part 2 of this would be beneficial, because I want to talk, I have so many more questions about specific situations, sleepovers, right? Summer camps, like all these things that I think parents
good secrets, bad
right,
secrets.
Exactly. That's so
talking
much more
about touch. Oh yeah, so much
more to cover. Okay, well, Cherie, thank you so much. This was fantastic, and I'm looking forward to the second half of our discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenny. It's been great.
Make sure you like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you for joining us on Kids Doc Talk.